Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Burke from Lake Oswego PD in Oregon, 36 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to today's conversation. So welcome to the show, Chief Burke. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Of course, I'm hoping that you can give a little bit of background. 36 years is a long time to be in law enforcement. What did those 36 years look like for you?
Yeah, it's four different police departments, which tells me that I can't seem to hold a job. But so started, graduated college in 1989 and went to work in a pretty small police department in Oregon with like 21 police officers. And after being there for a little over 3 years, a couple of my friends decided it'd be really cool to go work for the city of Portland, which I didn't think it was all that cool, but I did it anyway. And I will tell you, it was one of the best things I ever did. And going from a small community like Forest Grove, Oregon, to the big city of Portland was pretty amazing. And it was nothing of what I thought it was going to be. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. So I spent 25 years with Portland Police Bureau, working in all different positions, whether it was a patrol officer, working undercover as a drug, investigator, working in our drugs and vice division, or working in detectives as a homicide sergeant, uh, various different administrative assignments, whether it was in the chief's office or in professional standards, and really just kind of got a greater understanding of the entire business, not just the policing side of the work. And then after 25 years there, I retired, and I was fortunate enough to get hired as a deputy chief in the city of Salem. And I worked there for about 5.5 years. And then this incredible opportunity happened in Lake Oswego. And a friend got a hold of me and said, "You really need to take a look at this." And I had no desire to be a chief. It was just not in the cards for me at that time. And I was looking toward retirement. And I didn't really think it was fair to offer somebody just 3 years of my life. And now that I've been here for almost 3 years, I think I've got at least another three more to offer. So it's just been a great experience all the way through.
That's amazing. What differences did you see between being in a smaller organization versus a larger organization?
Well, the close-knit aspect of the work environment, I mean, when I worked in Forest Grove, our dispatch center was there, so we knew the people on the other end of the radio. It was a small community, and that's the only community that we served.
Mhm.
And there were 21 police officers, and you knew everybody well. You spent a lot of time together. Your families grew together. The relationships were really, really tight. And when I went to work for the city of Portland, my relationships were tight with the group of people I worked with,
Mm.
but not necessarily throughout the entire organization. We went from 21 officers to 1,000. And there are people today that a name will get mentioned of people who I probably worked very closely with or worked around. I have no idea who they were. And so the impacts in those organizations, you don't, it's not as, when things happen in different parts of the organization, you don't feel it as closely as you do when it's within your work group. The other thing is that the work never stops. In the big city, you're constantly, your priorities are completely different. Instead of how can I respond to a call for service and give the greatest level throughout the entire call, in a big city where you have calls stacking on top of each other, you're just trying to move through them and get people the best service you can to get them on to the next point. And most of the work that you do is just triage and move on. So it's a small city, you get to learn to do everything. Big city, you learn to deal with the big things and move on to the next big thing.
Understood. And I know you said that this career has been amazing and there were times where it was, the best moments of your life. Are you able to share maybe some of the biggest lessons or some of the biggest achievements that you've had throughout your career?
Wow, to think back over 36 years, it's some of the things that I'm most proud of.
Yeah.
I would say there were some initiatives that we did when I was a commander of our detective division that really focused on victims
Mm.
and primarily on sexual assault victims. And we were able to work with some of our community to push through some legislation at the state level to focus on survivors of sexual assault and the safe kit backlog and how we were able to help really impact the rest of the country
Yeah.
in developing some programs, especially some software that has been utilized throughout the entire US It's called SAMS, Sexual Assault Management System, that a lot of different law enforcement agencies are using. And that all got developed out of the city of Portland through their IT folks in the city of Portland. And then with the detectives and the supervisors within that division, it really pushed to really clear up the backlog of all the untested safe kits, sexual assault kits,
Yeah.
so that we could give some at least some closure to some folks. And we also we were able to track all the kits that were submitted. And so at any time, any victim could call and find out the status of their case and where things were. So that's one of the things. I mean, I'm sure as we talk, all these other things will come into my mind, but that's the one that really jumps out at me.
That's incredible. And I think it's a testament. I've never met anyone who's entered into this career who didn't want to help people. And there's a lot of conversations that I've had where, people are saying, you want to change the world, coming into this career. And sometimes you don't have the opportunity to have as big of an impact as you would necessarily like to. But I think that what you just said is a testament that you can make a big impact and you can change lives and you can help people. And I think that that's an incredible accomplishment. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Of course. I wanted to ask you, when you and I talked offline, you made this comment to me, and I was hoping you could explain what you meant by this. You said that the job cost you. What did you mean by that?
Well, I got so involved in the work and it was so fulfilling to me and it was so exciting that the thought of going to work versus the thought of being at home
Mm,
was actually, I mean, going to work and doing the work that we were doing was fulfilling. And I think I sacrificed a lot of time that I could have spent with people that actually would have appreciated having the time a little bit more.
yeah.
But I was having a good time and it was exciting. And I worked with a bunch of really good people. And it over time, and when it really became apparent to me was I was sergeant in homicide. And back in the old days, heck, I don't know if they still use pagers or not today, but I think some people do. But we would have a pager and a cell phone. And my kids got so conditioned to when the pager went off, their first response was bye dad.
Mm,
So, even I mean, when I think about it today, it's still one of those things that kind of impacts me. And I think about all the lost time, the Christmases, Christmas Eves, wrapping gifts, pager goes off, it's a homicide, you gotta go.
yeah.
And I was so entrenched in the work that I never noticed the impact.
Mm,
And it really became apparent to me, obviously, when my kids started growing and started missing those opportunities when dad wasn't around. And I thank God that, my wife was very supportive and helped pick up the gap, fill the gap when I wasn't there to do some of those things. But one of the proudest things I think that I look back to now as I talk to my kids is they say no matter what was going on, even though I was gone a lot, I never really missed anything,
mm.
which I'm trying to figure out how the heck that's even possible. But that's how you get to be this age and look like you're 10 years older, right? It's that lack of sleep, it's that sacrifice that you give for one thing to make up for something else. And it came at a cost, and obviously that caused issues with relationship and stress in the house. And it's taken a long time to really reprioritize those things and realize that there are more important things than being here in the office.
Do you think that that is a symptom of the career that, if the phone goes off and you have to go? Or do you think that there are ways to find a better home life balance that maybe you just didn't know at the time?
I hate to say I think it depends because it depends on the assignment that you have because some assignments you don't have a choice.
Right.
If you're on call for homicide and the pager goes off, that's your time to go. But one of the things I think we've gotten much better at is sharing that responsibility. I
Mm,
think rather than having that burden all on one person, we've done a much better job of trying to divide that up. And hopefully organizations are taking a look at the structure of the organization to quit relying so much on all the people who get things done. Because I've always believed, if you want something done, you give it to somebody who's busy.
mm.
Well, busy people like busy jobs, and they're going to really flock to those places that are going to create that level of excitement and adrenaline for them. And they're going to want to do that. And we as an organization have to think a little bit for them and take away some of those opportunities, and that's by spreading the work around.
Yeah. Is there any advice that you would give to someone who is maybe earlier in their career? It's interesting because I think people who are younger, coming into this career now, they prioritize that work-life balance a lot. But is there any advice that you could give, like something that you've learned, after the fact that would help someone to try to find more of that separation from work?
The biggest separation. So one of the things I learned pretty early on was, and for those who are paying attention, the old verbal judo days when we learned from George Thompson, who was the godfather of verbal judo. But he would talk about that transition point, and one of the important things about going to work and changing at work. So when you go in your home clothes and you go into the office and you have the opportunity to go into a locker room and change into your uniform, that's a transition point. And
Mhm.
then at the end of the day, changing out of your uniform and going home is another transition point. So really stressing that for folks to understand that that's your time to kind of step out of that role and
Yeah.
get back into an out of work role. The other thing that I think our current workforce is much better at that work-life balance. And I don't mean that, and I don't say that as a negative. I think they are just better at being able to prioritize those things, and they're not willing to sacrifice certain aspects of their life like a lot of us were willing to do. And I think that's for the better. Uh, when we take a look at the things that we could have done, I think one of the best pieces of advice I would give to people is to make sure you have relationships outside of the business. Maintain those hobbies, those things that you enjoy doing, and don't make them used tos. Because so many people that I've worked around have talked about all the things, well, I used to fish, or I used to run, or I used to golf, or I used to work out. And the used tos need to become more frequent. They need to become part of your daily routines.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I've never heard it put in the context of used tos. And I
Yeah.
think I've done that too in my life. Some for the better. Some things that I used to do, I'm glad I don't do anymore.
Well, and I have to give all the credit. I think Dr. Kevin Gilmartin really,
Yeah,
I learned from him the whole used to concept. And that's one of the things that we really need to just focus on the here and now and quit focusing on what's coming next
yeah,
and just live in a moment.
yeah, I agree with you. And that's something I really try to do is become more present and not worry so much about the past or the future. I am someone who's a very anxious person, and so I have to work on that, not being anxious. But I find that as I've gotten older, and I don't know if it's just a symptom of social media or, technology being around all the time, but I have found that it's been harder for me to be present. There's a lot of distraction. So I've been really mindful of that, of like, how can I, when I'm having conversations with people, be fully there? And it's not just phone down, it's also I'm not thinking about stuff. I'm
Right.
fully engaged in the situation. I'm looking around me, I'm noticing things in my environment. And I think that when you do that, time doesn't feel like it's going by as quickly. For me, at least, I feel like when I'm not present, I feel like I'm losing time. I'm like, where did that go? Because I'm so distracted and numbing out or zoning out that I'm not fully engaged with the environment or, my community or, my family. So,
No, I would agree. I was fortunate. I was able to speak to a bunch of graduates from the police academy, and I don't have my speech here in front of me, but one of the things that actually the concept was I talked about ghost of the policing past, ghost of the policing future, and ghost of the policing present. I
mm,
wondered how young they were. I wondered if they even knew who Scrooge was, but it was one of those things where I wanted them to understand that you can't worry about what's happened before. You just have to know what it was. You can't worry about what's coming because you really don't know what's going to happen in the future. So the only thing you can really control right now is what's in front of you.
yep.
And that was the gist of the conversation with the graduates that day. And that was the advice that I gave was be in the moment and don't worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. Just be here today and be your best version of yourself today.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, this is all kind of circles back into, our conversation today is to talk about wellness. And I think that that is a foundational piece of wellness, is to be able to find that baseline and to be present and mindful to regulate the nervous system. Because if you're thinking about the past, if you're worrying about the future, your nervous system is not at a regulated state. So, how can we get to that point? I know that when we talked, you mentioned that you don't think wellness is just one thing, it's a lot of different things. So, I was hoping you could give your insights into what your idea of wellness is.
Well, I think it's actually pretty consistent with yours. When I did a little bit of research into what I was going to be talking about today, I think focusing on both I mean, there's a financial piece of wellness.
Mhm.
There's a spiritual piece associated with whatever that spirituality is for any individual. There's the physical fitness, physical health, healthy eating, healthy lifestyles, and then there's mental health. And when you put all those things together, when I think of wellness, I think of all of those different buckets that all fall within the umbrella of wellness. And so many people tend to focus on one or two that they miss all the other areas. And as our organization takes a look at wellness as a whole, we want to make sure that we're looking at all the different buckets and working on all those areas for our employees.
I agree. I actually saw something the other day that said wellness is more than just fitness. And I was like, yes, like I can totally get on board with that thought process. But I also think that fitness is a really good place to start. Like the physical wellness is a really good place to start because it does tie into mental wellness. But I think that when we think of that word wellness, it's more than just physical fitness. There's so many other things that are associated with it that make it more dynamic. And I think that everything is intertwined. If you're not good financially, you're going to be stressed. You're going to be working more overtime. You're going to be with your family less, which is going to create more stress in the household. And it's this like, cyclical thing. Same thing. If you don't feel good physically, you're not going to feel good mentally. If you don't feel good mentally, you're not going to want to go and do anything physically. So everything is intertwined. I would really love if you maybe highlighted some of the things that you are doing organizationally. I know you shared some things with me offline, so if you could share to our listeners, that'd be great.
Right. So one of the things that we have is we have what's called Fit Time, and it's not unique to Lake Oswego by any means. I think Bend PD has been really good at focusing on wellness. They're kind of the leader in the state of Oregon, and we kind of modeled our Fit Time based on theirs, which is we try and give our officers, based on calls for service and availability, an hour every day to work out while they're on duty. And we say workout, but it could be anything. It could be mindfulness. It could be, we have a ping pong table downstairs that they'll go play ping pong for an hour just to unwind for a little bit. It could be going for a run. It could be going into the gym. The, they have to be available for calls because we still have calls that go on. And we
Yeah.
try to manage it as best we can with our staffing levels. But I think for the most part, and we're able to track who has access and who doesn't. And so they use their access cards to scan into the gym, but they don't have to go into the gym. But that's just our way of being able to tell who's done what or who's at least had the ability to use their Fit Time. And I think for the most part, those who want to use it have access and have the ability to do it. We've become more flexible in how we do it. We're just trying to let our supervisors figure out how best to manage that within for their shifts. The other things that we're doing is we're implementing some software that will give people access and ability to some mental health providers that I think will be a benefit. We're still working on implementing some of those programs. The one that we're looking at, I think, is really beneficial because it also allows for family members to have access where family members can report things that they feel like they need to, some concerns, maybe some observations, and they can do it anonymously. And that allows us to apply some peer support to that. So we have a pretty robust peer support program. And we focus pretty heavily on making sure that we pay attention to what it is that our officers have been exposed to over any period of time, whether that's an accumulation of traumatic calls for service, depending on how we define those things. And then we start looking for different triggers, I guess, within our systems to identify when it looks as though somebody might be experiencing a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And then it's trying to figure out how to get some intervention in those areas. The other things we're doing is bringing in, folks to focus on some financial aspects, planning for trusts and wills and financial investment and all those different areas, and really just trying to make sure that we're keeping people healthy in all different areas. I'm sure I left something out, but
That's okay. No, that was great. I think the burning question, and I don't know if there's an answer to it, but I would love your perspective. I think the burning question is how do we get people who maybe don't initially raise their hand to do these things? Like, how do we facilitate or encourage that initial first step for people who maybe aren't already active, who aren't already raising their hand for these things?
Well, I think it starts with me, honestly. I mean, we're small enough. We have 77 people within our organization, both sworn and non-sworn. And when they see the leadership of the organization doing these things and talking about it and being open about it, and whether it's the physical fitness side or mental health or healthy eating, some of the different programs that we push out, I think that helps everybody else feel that much more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
The other thing that we're looking and exploring, and I think our association, our union is on board with us, is actually taking the stigma off of the mental health side of things and setting up a program where all of our officers are scheduled to go meet with a mental health provider once a year. They don't have to talk to them, they just have to go. And I would bet that the majority of the people who maybe feel like they should go, don't go because they're afraid of the stigma. And if
Right.
they just showed up, they would actually find ways to get some help with some of the things that are going on. And I'm not saying that our folks are heavily impacted and unable to do the job by any means, but I just don't want us to get to that point.
Yeah.
So the goal that I've had, and I talk about when we swear people in, is I want, after 30 years of working in this job, I want people to go walking out the door as happy and healthy as they were walking in.
Hmm.
And that's what we're going to continue to focus on and provide access to. And I think the more we talk about it and the more we demonstrate it, the more we model it, I can't help but think that that's going to catch on. And I think this generation of worker is much better at it than we were.
Yeah, I heard one time that you want to get as many years on the job in retirement. And I've even had people make jokes of like we want to like suck the pension system dry or whatever it is, as like a joke, but also reality, it's like we want you to have a long and successful life. Not just a career, but also after retirement. And how can we create more of that proactive wellness strategy so that you do have longevity? I think that there's so many things that we can do that are easy. I wouldn't say easy. I don't think that anything is easy when it comes to wellness. It takes,
Right.
effort, but it makes it easier to front load some of these things. And a lot of like the injuries, a lot of the mental health stuff, the burnout, like a lot of those things can be prevented. Not all of them. It's never going to be injury elimination. There's always going to be a requirement for reactive resources. But I think that a lot of the stuff we can front load so that it doesn't become something in the future, so that you do have a better chance at that longevity.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is helping people make habits,
Yeah.
healthy habits. Because once you make it a habit, then it becomes difficult to stop.
Hmm.
Like I say, I was fortunate at a very young age. I mean, growing up in an athletic family and always being involved in something like that, those are your non-negotiables. Your
Yeah.
time where you spend time working and focusing on yourself and making sure that you're your best version of you can be. You can't negotiate that time. So you set away that time, or you set aside that time where it's your time to focus on you, and then you figure your rest of your schedule based on that,
Hmm.
rather than the flip side of when am I going to fit this in?
Yep. I really like that mentality, and it's something I've had to adopt for myself. I am at my core a people pleaser, and I like to say yes to everything, and I've had to have boundaries around my non-negotiables. And the way that I framed it in my head that it has been really helpful for me, I really pride myself on being on time, being consistent. I always show up, I'm reliable. And if I were to have a meeting with you, for example, I would not be late to that meeting or miss that meeting. Like I have enough respect for you. Of course, like things pop up and we've all missed meetings. But what I'm saying is that I have more respect for you than to just cancel last minute and not do it, right? I have to have that same respect for myself, right? Of saying, hey, I'm going to make a meeting for myself. This is for my wellness. It's a non-negotiable. I'm not going to sleep in, I'm not going to cancel, I'm not going to not show up because I respect myself and my wellness enough to do it. And that has been helpful for me. I don't know if that's helpful for anybody else, but that's been helpful for me to make sure because it is easy to say, oh, I don't feel like it. Oh, I don't have time. I want to sleep in. I want to snooze or whatever it is. And so if you have that mentality of like, no, I'm going to show up for me.
I think it's making you a priority.
Yeah, for sure. I also think that, to your point, creating those habits, it's hard. And there's some stats that they vary, but there's stats that talk about how long it takes to create a habit. But I always tell people, I'm like, imagine how hard it is sometimes if someone doesn't floss, how hard is it to get someone to floss, right? It's a simple thing, takes a couple minutes, but that's something that's hard to create that habit. But like you said, once you start to do it, you feel like you need to do it and it's something that becomes a part of your routine. And so I always encourage people like start slow, whenever it comes to something, like do something that's sustainable. Maybe try to do something one time a week, two times a week, and then you can always add to it once you feel like it's sustainable. I think one of the things that happens, especially with wellness, there's so much that you go like full speed ahead, especially with like the type A type personality of like, I'm going to go all in for everything and then you burn out and you fizzle really quickly. So, how can we create sustainable habits so that you can have that consistency long term?
Yeah, good point. I mean, it's setting that expectation, right? And understanding what's realistic and what's not. And you can't go from the couch to the field overnight. It takes that buildup and that work into it. People have unrealistic expectations that they can get out and run a marathon when they haven't gotten off the couch in a year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easier to stay fit than to get fit. And that's
Exactly.
physically, mentally, all of it. I know that you said that you started a statewide wellness initiative.
That might be a little overstatement. Uh, I was, I was fortunate enough to be part of a statewide initiative. And it came out of the legislature. The legislature was looking at creating some legislation that probably would have been potentially harmful to law enforcement. In order to not go down that road, we agreed to establish a wellness work group for the state. And out of that, my part of it was to establish statewide policy for wellness and tie it to certification. So when we look at our law enforcement certification, our credentials, part of what we have to do is we have to focus so many areas or so many hours in areas of wellness over a 3-year time period. So it's a requirement. It's not an option. And which bucket it falls into depends on how the organization classifies it or qualifies it. But the fact is that we have to be mindful of it. We have to pay attention to it because our certification is tied to it.
Interesting. Have you had any feedback on the word mandating?
People don't like the word mandate.
I know.
Um, it causes us to kind of put up a wall.
Hmm.
But tying it to tying that training to your certification helps us, I think, work through that a little bit. And the same thing when we talk about mandating an annual check-in with a mental health provider. People don't like being told they have to do something. At the same time, I'm not telling them they have to go talk about anything. All we're saying is you just need to show up at the appointment. Talk all you want in the hour that you're there. We're paying for it, or say nothing. So that I think trying to ease the concerns about what it is that they're being mandated to do, it probably helps that term. But nobody likes to be told what to do.
I know. I think the knee-jerk reaction as humans is no or why. And so I find that, and I've gotten away from telling anyone to do anything. I can't walk into a briefing room and be like, do this. They'll be like, who are you? Like, and again, it'll be like no or why. And so I think that if you can have a deep-seated why you're doing certain things, I think people get on board with that a little bit more than, especially if it's like, hey, this is for you, this is for your wellness, we care about you, this is for safety on the job, this is a part of your training. So I agree that the knee-jerk reaction is no or why, but I think you obviously have a why, so that's helpful.
Well, I think so. You get back to the mandate thing and you start thinking about, as a chief of police, I can come in and I can tell people what to do.
Mm.
And for the most part, I can expect that they're gonna do what I told them to do. But I don't want them to do it because I have 2 stars in my collar. I want them to do it because we have the relationship built and we have the trust within our organization. And we take the time to explain why. Why is this important?
Mhm.
And I guess an example of this is we're going through some physical testing for our folks that's basically focused on some cardiac health and a bunch of other things, different program that we're working in. I have 77 people that it's offered to and 31 signed up to do it. That was disappointing to me
Mm.
because this is something that we're offering for our folks and it's preventative and it can give people information today about what could happen to them tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we only had that many people sign up caused me to send out an email. And it was not something to say, I'm telling you to go do this. It was a story about 3 friends that I lost over the last 6 months that were all cardiac events, all of which were physically fit, healthy people that you would have never guessed would suffer from a cardiac event. So hoping that somehow the relationship will help drive that conversation versus the mandate.
Yeah. I think that you bring up a really good point of, and again, it goes back to what we talked about before of like, how can we get in front of things? How can we be more proactive? And I think that one, thank you for sharing that. I think that some of the hardest things that we go through in our lives are our greatest opportunity to help others. And you having experienced that, I would imagine, is now impacting the way that you lead and the prioritization that you're having on the wellness of your people, of saying, hey, I went through this. It was so hard. And I want to make sure that I'm supporting you so that that doesn't happen to you, so that we can be more proactive and preventative. And I think that cardiovascular health is one of the things that is often overlooked and misunderstood. I think that there are a lot of statistics coming out right now that are showing that it's actually one of the top reasons for death in this profession. And so, how again can we have early detection, but how can we also have resources? Because we know not always. I have a friend who was a SWAT guy, same thing, 26. I think he was 26 when it happened. He's alive now, but he died for several minutes and he lives now to tell the story. And that's been his passion now, is to help law enforcement with AED training and, get them the resources that they need because they're often first on the scene. But um, a lot of what impacts cardiovascular health is stress,
Mhm.
nutrition, sitting for long periods of time, right? We know that this career is incredibly stressful. We know that you go from being up here to down here, sometimes several times throughout a day. We know that nutrition is challenging, especially with shift work, especially if you're working graves. We know that sitting is a part of what you do, whether that's, behind the desk or in the squad vehicle. So I think that if you understand that these things are going to be hard and difficult, then how can we again have resources to front load it? But then how can you know what's going on within your body? So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that it's something that um, I also think that people are afraid. I think people are afraid of the unknown. And maybe there's a little fear in not getting, the help that they need because they don't want to know. But I think that the more we can have these conversations, hopefully the more on board people will be with being more proactive.
I agree with you. I mean, hopefully these conversations allow it just to be part of our normal day to day. And it's not something that we're focusing on to the point where we're belaboring it, but it just becomes part of the norm.
Yeah, and I think to your point, if you start implementing things where like things are accessible to everybody, everyone's going to see a therapist, like you guys are talking about it on a day to day, it's not just after an event, then it will become part of that normal routine, and it's not going to feel like, oh, I'm broken. And so now they're making me do something. It's like, no, like you might be super healthy, but like we want to make sure that you stay that way. And so I like that a lot. I know that we talked a little bit about some of your long-term goals, especially in the context of retirement and insurance stuff. Can you explain a little bit about that? Because I don't know exactly how you described it, so I'm going to let you be the expert there.
This is pretty lofty. We just started a police foundation, and what we're trying to do is, law enforcement, we get to retire pretty young,
Mhm.
but we get the opportunity to. Some of us don't take it.
Like you.
Yeah, well, 'cause I'm afraid of what I do if I don't work. So, but to give people the opportunity to retire at the age that they retire and not have the financial burden of trying to figure out how they cover that gap for insurance between the retirement age until they're eligible for Medicare. So that takes them to 65. So let's say somebody retires at 55, that's a 10-year gap at about $1,000 a month just to get insurance coverage. So what we're trying to do is generate some energy in our community to support our officers, and we'll have some criteria attached to it, like in order to qualify for any of your partial payment or any full payment or partial payment to help offset your insurance, you have to have worked here for at least 10 years and you have to retire from here. So
Mm,
that helps stop those folks who maybe work in nearby areas who come here and work for 2 years, retire and get a benefit.
got it.
And then maybe we stagger it, right? Maybe at 10 years, you get 50% covered, at 20 and plus, you get 100% covered. But that's gonna take a lot of financial resource in order to make that happen, because the city doesn't have the ability to fund that. Some cities have in the past, and it's driven them into the ground. They don't have the ability to sustain that kind of financial impact to their organization. So we're looking for our community, and we're hoping that we have people in our community who feel as though they want to contribute to the organization, and they want to contribute to the wellness and well-being of our officers, and that this is something we can actually work with the foundation to raise. And the idea is that whichever age it is, that we find a way to offset some of that cost to them by the time they qualify for Medicare.
Do you think that because of that gap in insurance, that people are almost forced to go back to work and to find other means for income instead of being able to, maybe live off of what they saved?
Yeah, I'll change. I know that's the case.
Okay.
And we have people who retire. You hear about people who do the hire backs or drop programs, or things like that. Most people, once they hit a certain age, are working for benefits.
Hmm.
That's it. I mean, yeah, they're collecting a wage, they're making, they're making a decent wage, but the real reason why they're doing it is for that very reason of making sure that they work as long as they can to close that gap between when they can retire and when they can collect their Medicare.
Understood.
So if we can help take some of that burden off them, then maybe that need to work that many more years in the industry, at 55 years old in this industry is starting to get a little worn out,
Mm,
especially if you're still out working in a patrol car. That's really tough. So making sure that we're giving people the opportunity and ability to actually walk out the door when they want to, versus this burden of knowing that I have this cost that I have to somehow cover.
yeah. No, that makes complete sense. And it all kind of like came together in my head because I know so many people who I think are staying in this career longer and or they retire, but they have to hop right back into another career because of the gap. So I hope that that's something that you guys get off the ground. I know you said it's a lofty goal, but it sounds like a beneficial one. So I'm curious to know, like, and we said this earlier, but what would be in your mind the perfect wellness program, or what do you think, like, if you can wave a magic wand, every organization within the country should have? If money wasn't an option, just perfect world scenario.
Wow. So if money was an option, it would probably be what I just talked about. But when I think really looking more realistically, if I think just having, and I'll say a consortium of providers, but
Mm,
having people available who are culturally competent in the industry, who understand what it is, what the experiences are for first responders, so that when we have traumatic events or we have people who just need some assistance somewhere along the line, they can go talk to somebody that they don't traumatize based on the stories they tell them. And
yeah.
I've heard folks go meet with different providers, whether it's through an EAP program, that are not culturally competent, and they go have a conversation with this provider, and the provider is shocked by the content of the conversation,
Yep.
which is worse for the person, because then they're looking at themselves like, well, what the hell's wrong with me? If if I'm seemingly normal and I just traumatized you to the point where you can't even do your job, what does that say about where I'm at? And so we actually create more damage by sending people to people who don't understand the work they do.
Yeah.
So it's a long-winded way of getting to having culturally competent providers for our folks.
I know that that's a really big challenge. A lot of the conversations I have across the country are about that, especially smaller organizations that are maybe in more rural areas where they're like, the resources to us are limited. And so I know a lot have been, maybe going more towards the telehealth and, trying to get people outside their network. But I heard something today, and I was curious if you've heard this because it was interesting. I heard an organization say that they are training people within their organization to be therapists for other organizations. And so they're culturally competent, they've been on the job, they understand, but it's not for their people. It's so that they can provide resources to other people in their surrounding area or other organizations. Have you heard this before?
I have, and
Okay.
I mean, I'll hold back my initial thought and response. So much so that I've heard that we have folks who are working in peer support groups who are actually learning to use EMDR
Mhm.
and implementing EMDR for other law enforcement agencies. And because I guess I come from a place where I think I can only talk to somebody who really knows what they're doing, right?
Yeah,
To think that I would trust somebody enough to walk me through that process who is not as trained as, say, MD or PhD or other licensed clinician.
yeah.
I I have to get over my own phobia, right? I mean, if I were to be completely honest,
I
but I
understand.
think
I
those who
understand.
are doing it, it's effective.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. I would say that I could see how by doing that there's maybe a compromise in experience level. So maybe there's the cultural competency, but there isn't the experience level of being within that field for a long time. So it's kind of that trade-off. I can see what you're saying.
Right. But again, I say that's just my own bias, right? I mean, I've got to walk into it knowing that what I'm hearing from agencies that are doing that, they're limited in the resources that they have available. So getting something is better than doing nothing.
Right.
And having people who understand the work and have had some level of training and having an ability to do that, and even more so have the desire.
Yeah.
And so when you put all those things together, I think that these programs are probably doing more good than harm.
Yeah. I think,
And what other options do you have in front of you?
right. And I think too, it's like, when I first started working in this like wellness space with law enforcement, I didn't have the experience, but now I have 8 years of experience, and so everyone kind of has to start somewhere, I think. And so I think you're right. There's lots of ways to look at it, but I do agree with you that, maybe start somewhere. Something's better than nothing. And, those people who maybe don't have experience now will have 10 years of experience in 10 years, and maybe it'll be effective. So, yeah. I have one final question for you. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier, or something that has helped you along the way.
I think I already said it, but what I'm going to talk about is making sure that you have things that are in place that are not part of the job that you do, because so many people develop their whole life around who they think they are based on the job that they perform,
Mm.
and they lose track of who they really are. And so having those relationships outside, and I'll say in a law enforcement perspective, having those relationships outside of law enforcement, and not just to say that you have them, but to have real deep seated relationships with other people in your community that you can rely on, that you can talk to, that you can spend time with, and get away from the work and have that ability to just kind of shut down at times and not be so attached and not identify who you are with what you do.
Thank you. Great words of wisdom. I appreciate your time so much. I'm going to leave the floor if we miss anything, but that's all I have for you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the invitation, and this was a great time talking about things that really matter to me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for trusting me and spending the last hour talking about wellness. I appreciate it.
Thanks.